Welcome to the Building Bridges Summit for Friday, June 19th. Broadcast is now starting.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on our unexpected holiday, Juneteenth. I'm appreciative of everyone who joined us despite the holiday, and hope that after this event you will have a nice rest of the day, remembering the reason for the day. On Wednesday, I'm all confused this morning. On Wednesday, we recorded the session, but the first part of the session did not get recorded. So I am going to just review a couple of things I did for those people that are joining us for the first time today. And then we will go on from there to today's session. Yesterday, we talked about the Bridges Out of Poverty training, and that we did not propose that all your questions regarding poverty would be answered, or suggest that there were no other theories on poverty. Bridges Out of Poverty is a starting point for us. It is a new lens through which we can view ourselves and those we work with. The purpose is to give community leaders from all disciplines a start on the path to improve relationships and outcomes. Some things to keep in mind: generational poverty, which is defined as families where at least 2 generations have lived in poverty, and situational poverty, where a specific event such as loss of employment causes the poverty, are different. The Bridges Out of Poverty work is based on patterns, and all patterns have exceptions. So as you hear information today and the following 2 days when we do this training, you may think of exceptions as you listen to our speaker, so please keep that in mind. Yesterday, we talked about the mental models, and a little bit about the fact that we do have a class system in this country, but we don't really talk about it. The mental models that we discussed, just as a quick reminder for those of you who were here or who did not get a chance to get through all of the video. For those in poverty, they tend to focus on relationships. For those in the middle class, the focus is on achievement and, what I've accomplished, my goals, my college education, my training, those kinds of things. And then for the wealthy, it's connections and who you know, and they are, as Kathy put it yesterday, all about putting their names on things and leaving legacy. So the focus is very different. And I know that's a real quick 2-second summary. And I hope that if you have not had the chance to go back and view the video from from the day before yesterday, that you will do that. You will take the time to do that. And on that note, Kathy, take it away.
Thank you, Vicki. I appreciate that quick summary. Thanks to those of you who both were there on Wednesday and tuned in again today. We were talking earlier before the broadcast started about, this way of training and learning. And one of the things that I miss in this format is that I don't get to hear the stories that you all have to tell. And some of the best examples that I have gotten are from hearing from what other people, have experienced, and stories that they have told and situations that they have dealt with clients. So if you have a story or a comment, please feel free to share that in the question and answer box on your screen, because it's always interesting to me, and it makes the material stay fresh and relevant in my mind when I'm hearing what's going on with other people. When we talked about mental models on Wednesday, the important thing for that to remember is you have to keep your mind open. As the young lady in the video showed us, every single person that walked past her, she had a comment. She was willing. She could put them in a category of nerd or loser or dork or whatever. And when you judge somebody so quickly, you lose the opportunity to understand why they might be in a different way. They might be a different way. So understanding a person's mental model really does help you to understand. And in poverty, what we learned about the mental model was their thinking is immediate. They are firmly entrenched in today. And the phrase, the tyranny of the moment, describes that they are so overwhelmed by just getting through the business of today that they do not have any experience, any opportunity to future plan. So I just wanted to reiterate some of that. So I am not seeing me on the screen, Aaron. Am I up and running? Are you all seeing that?
Yes, you are. You are up and running. I'm not seeing your content if you're trying to share PowerPoint, though.
I'm going to share that right now. So let's hope that works. Okay. Okay, you got that?
You are live.
You are.
Okay, all right. I just need to get to the slideshow format. So, oops, didn't go far enough. So what we're going to talk about now is, and excuse me for fast forwarding through those slides. What we're going to talk about now is language and how the different registers of language that people have are used in everyday communication, and how language and the story structure and the experience influence the cognitive development. So as we go through this, keep in the back of your mind the premise or the point that people in poverty are living in today, because all of these concepts eventually link together to help you understand. So think for just a minute about how you use language in your business. And in this pandemic time, when we're not seeing people face to face, we're doing this kind of video communication, or sometimes it's just over the phone, or it's email, or it's text messages. But think about the different ways that language is used, whether it's your front desk person or how you communicate with your supervisor or the people that you supervise, the administration in your business, and how that impacts the business that you're in. So I'm just going to give you a minute. And if you are watching this with other people, certainly take the opportunity to chat about that with them just for a minute or so. You know, in a live training session, I would be able to see when people are looking up and stopping talking, but I'll just have to trust you now that you're stopped talking. So there are 5 registers of language, and that's what you should be looking at on your own screen right now. The first register is what we call frozen. language that is always the same. The Lord's Prayer, I don't know that wedding vows is a good example because people pretty much now say whatever they want. But the Pledge of Allegiance, when you get sworn in a courtroom, prose language is prescriptive. It's exactly the same. I would say it the same way that you would say it. There's no change to it. The second register is the formal register, and that's standard syntax and word choice. In work and school, we speak in complete sentences and we use very specific word choice. Consultative would be formal register, but is used in conversation. So if you're having a conversation with your coworker, you might not finish the sentence. The coworker might jump in, finish the thought, and it's more relaxed than the formal register. That is the language, the formal register and the consultative register. That's what's used at work and school. The next register is casual, and that's the language between friends and is generally characterized by a 400 to 800 word vocabulary. The word choices are sometimes general, they're not specific, and conversation is dependent on nonverbal assist, which is particularly different when you're doing this kind of a learning experience, when you can't see what the other people are thinking. Sentence syntax is often incomplete. There's just fragments of sentences or maybe just a thought here and there. But it's very casual, and it is the word choice between 400 and 800 words. What that means is that the impact or the meaning of what you're trying to convey is expressed not so much in the words as in the tone of voice or the volume or the body language that goes with it. And so when you're texting with someone, or sometimes even on the phone, you can hear the volume, you can hear the tone, but you don't see the body language. You know, you don't see the expression, you don't see the look on their face. You don't see that maybe they have folded their arms across their chest and completely turned away from you. And that's the difficulty with communication that relies solely on words. So in poverty, most people speak in the casual register. So their meaning is based as much on volume, tone of voice, body language, expression, and so on, as much or more as the word choice is. And what's important to remember about casual register, and that being the language of poverty, is that when we send kids to school and they have grown up for the first 4 or 5 years of their life speaking in casual register, and then we pack them off to school where the language is formal register, we have sort of sent them off into unknown territory. Who teaches school? Who are school teachers? Yes, there are school teachers who come out of poverty, but most of the teachers and the administration and the staff are middle class. And that's true in schools and in government. People in poverty generally don't get to those positions because of the education requirements, and people in wealth aren't going to be bothered. I mean, those are professions that are just not worth it to a person who's living on a trust fund. So schools are middle class organizations. The teachers are middle class, the language is middle class, the administration is middle class. So you send a child who has grown up with a 400 to 800 word vocabulary, and he's used to hearing fragments of sentences or phrases or parts of sentences, and he goes into an environment where everyone speaks in complete sentences with appropriate syntax. it puts the child in a completely different place. When I did this material at the middle school where my daughter works, one of the teachers said, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that we're supposed to talk like them? Well, no, of course it doesn't mean that, because number one, children are smart and they can sense when you are not authentic or genuine. And number two, you won't be able to carry it off. And number three, that's not teaching the child how to learn to adapt to what is basically a middle class situation. He's in a situation, he's in an environment now where the language is not familiar to him. I mean, the words here and there are familiar, and he might understand tone and inflection when the teacher is aggravated, but we send children off to school, and we don't think about the fact that the child is not really speaking the same sort of language. And that's why early childhood and preschool programs are so important, so that the child can begin to catch up. We don't want to dumb down the teacher, certainly. We want to model good behavior. We want to model good speech patterns. We just have to be aware that that's what the child has learned thus far. That's what the child came out of. The last register, the fifth register of language, is the intimate, which is the language between lovers or twins, and also the language of sexual harassment, which seems to be relatively current these days. So I don't really spend a whole lot of time talking about that. What you need to remember from this is that formal register is what's spoken in school and in business. And kids who have grown up in generational poverty are very often not prepared to understand that kind of language. So examples of casual register, the first one is what's up? And what it means in formal register is how are you doing? Casual register, oh, my bad. Formal register is, it was my fault, please excuse me. I accept responsibility for my grievous error. I apologize for my faux pas. You see that there are way more words in formal register than in casual register, because casual register is super dependent on the nonverbal assist, the volume on the tone, on the expression, on the body language, and so on. Formal register is, those nonverbal assists are important, but language choice is more specific, and you can see there's way more words. In casual register, somebody just might, just groan. And what that translates to in formal register is, I made a mistake. I feel uncomfortable. I do not wish to comply with your request. Would you consider an alternative? So again, you see there's way more words in formal register than in casual register. What's that you say? Formal register translation, could you repeat that, please? Casual register, hook me up. Formal register, would you be so kind as to introduce me to, or I would really appreciate your assistance. Casual register, that's tight, that's cool, that's the bomb. Formal register is, this activity overwhelmed me with its outstanding value and significance to my future. This is an excellent suggestion. I would like to compliment you on your choice of. So again, formal register, so many more words. Very dependent on word choice, very dependent on appropriate syntax and grammar. Whereas casual register, much, much fewer words and a stronger dependence on the nonverbal assist, which again, to relate to the current situation that we're all in, where we're communicating a lot with email, with text messages, or even with what we're doing now in an online situation, you can you can hear me now, but you can't see me, so you don't know if I'm looking out the window or if I am focused on you and completely engaged. So I think that the situation that we're in now, the pandemic has made us more aware of how dependent we all are on the nonverbal assist, on the look on somebody's face. You know, when someone has said something stupid, or the body language when they have completely turned away from you and you know you've lost them. So this slide is research done in children from ages 1 to 4, which I'm sure you all know, ages 1 to 4 are that window of opportunity for children where they are most susceptible to language development, to learning words, and so on. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see the source for this particular research. So in the welfare class, and I do not like that label, but that it is what it is. Basically, we're saying lower socioeconomic group. Children by age of 4 have been exposed to 13 million words. That is not 13 million different words. That's 13 million spoken words. They get one affirmation, which is, as an example, oh, Vicki, you are such a good girl, for every 2 prohibitions, which is, Vicki, you know better than that. Why did you do that? Or, Vicki, I cannot believe you did that. So the child in the poverty group gets half as many positives as he gets negatives. So if you think about what that does to the child's willingness to speak up, unless he particularly enjoys negative attention, and granted, some children would rather get negative attention than no attention at all, it might make that child less likely to speak up. By contrast, in the working class, which is probably the lower end of the middle class grouping, but by age of 4, those kids have heard 26 million spoken words. They get 2 positives. Vicki, you're so smart. Vicki, you're such a good girl. For every 1, I can't believe you did that, you know better. So they are slightly more encouraged to speak up, speak out, and ask questions. And in the professional class, which would be upper middle class or wealthy, by age 4, those children have heard 45 million words spoken out loud. They get 6 positives for every 1 negative that they hear. And the school teacher group that I worked with, they were absolutely astonished and felt that it explained a lot of what they dealt with in the classroom. So the 45 million words that the children in a professional household have heard, those are words that are spoken in conversation with the child, or words that the child overhears in other conversations in the household. So there's a whole lot more verbal interaction. When the child gets an affirmative every time he asks a question, you know, the child is more likely to ask questions. As an example, if a child looks out the window and says, Mommy, what is that bird doing? In a household, in a poverty household, go back to mom living in the tyranny of the moment. Mom is stressed about whether she has enough in the pantry to put dinner on the table. Maybe mom is worried about if there's enough gas in the car so she can get to work tomorrow, if the car even starts. And she's thinking about is her mother over her cold, and is her mother even going to be able to watch the kids tomorrow? So her bandwidth is pretty much tied up by the tyranny of the moment. So a child asking a random question about, Mommy, what is that bird doing? That child might get, I don't have time for that, or I'm busy, or whatever, maybe not even answered at all. This does not mean that that mom doesn't love that child. Of course, mom loves the child. What it means is that mom's mental energy is so focused on the tyranny of the moment, getting through today, that she just flat does not have time to go off on that tangent with her child. Now, jump down to the mom in the professional class. The child looks out the window and says, Mommy, what is that bird doing? Mommy gets up, walks over to the window, and says, oh, that's the mama bird, and she's building a nest. And maybe mom goes to the laptop and shows child pictures of birds building their nests, or maybe it results in going outside where they can look up in the trees and see if they see other nests, and it might turn into a learning experience. And again, it doesn't mean that that mom loves her child any more than the mom in poverty. It just means that that mom isn't tied down by the tyranny of the moment. She knows full well, not only does she have enough food in the pantry for dinner tonight, but she's probably got several choices for dinner tonight. Could get carry out, which a lot of us have done recently. She's got choices. She's got time. She doesn't have to worry about whether the car will start, or whether there's fuel in the car, or whether the rent or the mortgage note is going to get paid. So she's got more space in her brain, as it were, to respond to the child and use the moment as a teachable moment. And so the child hears more words even. And what it teaches that child is that asking questions is good. And if you ask a question, you get a lot of attention from mommy, which is also a good thing. So the language development helps us understand sometimes why kids go off to school and they don't respond in the classroom. They don't want to interact because their experience in asking questions has not been positive. Asking questions doesn't pay off. It's not a positive for them. Whereas the child who gets mom's full focused attention with a trip to Barnes and Noble and time spent on the laptop looking at birds, asking a question really, really paid off for that child. So the language development really does have a long-term impact, both on the child's preparation to go into the classroom and the child's willingness to put themselves sort of out there by even asking a question. So we're going to see a video in a minute, and it will help you understand that people in poverty have a different pattern of discourse or conversation between what people in the middle class or what the wealthy class have, which is formal discourse or conversation, and what people have in poverty, which, going back to the casual register, is a more circuitous manner of conversation. So, Aaron, as soon as you can pop the video up there, the better.
If you work with middle school students or high school students, you hear things like I cannot believe how many times I can ask like in the middle of one sentence, it works like that. And when you talk that way, there's a tendency to try to write that way. Well, if you don't know both casual and formal register, it buys you trouble. We have begun now in the educational arena to do something we had thought not a good thing to do, and that's to emphasize formal register. At one point, teachers were told, oh, don't say anything. It'll lower the kids' self-esteem if we correct their grammar and insist upon them using good words. Well, that's crap. That was casual register. I'm going to tell you two stories, and you can see the difference. I'll tell you one in casual register. It's a story about a little boy on Ritalin, and you have to help me out. Are you ready? Do you know Miss Johnson came over to our house last night at 3 o'clock in the morning? Yes, she did, at 3 o'clock in the morning. And guess what she wanted? She wanted to borrow my mama's car. That's what my mama said. My mama said, you borrow sugar, but you do not borrow a car. And so she just stayed and stayed. Miss Johnson just stayed, and my mother had to get up early because my daddy works at the Metro. Your daddy work at the Metro? My daddy works at the Metro, and he got my mama that car at the credit union because, you know, you can get good deals at the credit union if your daddy worked for the Metro. So he got my mama a 1995 Chrysler Suburban or something like that. But anyway, my mama really likes her car, so that's why she wouldn't let Miss Johnson borrow. But Miss Johnson didn't go home after my mama said she couldn't borrow a car. She just stayed and stayed. And since my daddy had to go to the Metro at 4:30, she said it was okay. But when she was still there when the Today Show came on, my mother was kind of tired, and she only gets to stay home on Wednesdays because Wednesdays is when she watches Young and the Restless. You watch Young and the Restless? My mama said, how many times can Victor marry Nikki? Anyway, she was really getting tired, and so after Miss Johnson had been over to our house for a long time, the school called, and my mother answered the phone, and they asked to speak to Miss Johnson, and my mother said, Miss Johnson does not live here. Miss Johnson said she had her phone calls forwarded over to our house, and my mother said, that's taking a lot of liberty to have your phone forwarded to somebody's house when you don't really ask them to do that. But anyway, my mother's a good person, and since it was the school, she took the call, and so they wanted her to come and pick up Jack. You know Jack? Jack ever been to your house? Jack touches everything in your living room, and he touched my mama's dog. The dog's head go up and down like this. She got it from the Hemisphere in 1965. It was very dear to her. And he broke the dog's head off, and now the dog's head is on with super glue. We put it on with some, you're not supposed to be able to see through the super glue, but you can see the super glue. And my mother said she was going to write the super glue people a letter because they said you wouldn't be able to tell that it was broken, but you can see that it was broken because now his head moves like this. It won't move up and down like it used to. And so my mother was very mad about that because Jack broke up everything in the living room, but she was really mad because he broke a dog from the Hemisphere that she got in 1966. And so then the school wanted her to come and pick up Jack, and so then she said she didn't have a car, and my mama said, do I look like Yellow Cab? But because she was very, nervous about Jack being in school, she took her to school, and guess what happened when we got to school? It was an ambulance parked in front. My mama said, that boy killed somebody. But the ambulance driver was really good looking. My mama said he was really fine. I asked her how she knew. She said she was blind. She wasn't blind and she wasn't dead, so she could look very good and see he was good looking. And so she said that he was very good looking and he had big muscles and everything. He kind of looked like Sly Stallone, and my mother loved Sly Stallone. Did you see him in Rambo? He was very good in Rambo. He held a gun and it went like this, and all the bullets fell out. My mother thought that was really sexy. She told my daddy that, but he was not impressed. And so then we got to the school, and she was looking at the ambulance driver, but my mother went on in the school, but Miss Johnson stayed out there to talk to the ambulance driver, and my mother wanted to know why she didn't go in, because after all, it wasn't her kids who had been called. It was about Miss Johnson's kids. So when she went in the office, she said, I am not Jack's mother. I brought her over here, but she is outside talking to the ambulance driver, and we don't know why the ambulance is his, but I can guess. I'm Marcus and Kevin's mother. You know Marcus and Kevin? I'm a very good mother, and I don't ever have any trouble with my children. And so when I come up here, I'm coming up here just to volunteer. But I brought Miss Johnson up here because, I'm a good neighbor. And so anyway, the principal came out and said that Jack had been very disruptive at school and that he had torn up everything. And you should have seen the principal's office. Everything in there was cockeyed. And they called the ambulance because Miss Johnson didn't get there in time. You know why she didn't get there in time? She had to go home and change her clothes. She put on a skirt that was so tight, she had to walk down the steps like this. And that's why she couldn't walk very good, and that's why she couldn't get into school real fast. Plus, she was talking to the ambulance driver. So then they took Jack to the hospital. And Miss Johnson was supposed to ride in the back. But guess where she rode? Up front with the ambulance driver. And he almost had to push her up in the ambulance because she had on that tight skirt and she couldn't climb up those stairs. So she pushed in the ambulance. And in the meantime, Jack was in the back, and my mother said she could see through the little window. He had the tongue depressors and all the tubes. He had torn up the back of that ambulance by the time they got to the hospital. And they took him up on the 5th floor. You know what's up there, right? They gave him a lot of tests. It took all day. My mama missed Young and the Restless. And she doesn't like missing Young and the Restless because if you miss it on Wednesday, you don't know what happened. You can miss all other days, but if you miss Wednesday, you don't know what happened. So she was very mad about that. But anyway, he had to stay up there a long time. They gave him some Psychological, that's what, some psychological tests. And they gave him some little yellow pills, you heard of them? My mother said, oh, some little bitty pills. She said, Jack need bigger pills than that because he'd been cutting up real bad. And so she said to my Miss Johnson, you need to go check and see if he can get some bigger pills because those look like they're not going to do a lot for him. But anyway, he's supposed to take those pills 2 times a day. One time he's supposed to take them in the morning from his mother, and the other time he's supposed to get them from the school nurse. But I know Miss Johnson's not going to get up in time to go give him those pills, and he's going to miss that morning pill. And you know, by 12 o'clock, he's going to be really bouncing off the wall. So my mother said she would call Miss Johnson and wake her up because she's a very nice woman, and she wakes people up like that because she gets up real early because my father worked at the Metro, and he has to be at work at 4:30. So my mother said she would be up and she would call Miss Johnson. But anyway, he is back at school and everything, and he's supposed to be doing okay. But my mother says one thing for sure, he can't come back in the living room because, you know, he broke the little dog's head, didn't move like this. And so now he can't come back anymore, and that's what happened to Jack. Now, what was the beginning of that story? You don't know. What was the plot? What was the ending? See, in formal register, there must be a beginning, a middle, and an end. If you're going to write in formal register, it has to flow. It has to go that way. Here's the same story in formal structure. Mrs. Johnson visited her neighbor early this morning in order to borrow her vehicle. Unfortunately, the neighbor was not willing to part with the vehicle, but she stayed to visit anyway. She stayed long enough until the school called and said that there was a difficult time going on at school with her son, and she was asked to come and retrieve him for home care. Mrs. Johnson did not arrive at the school in a timely manner, and unfortunately, the school personnel were required to call an ambulance. She did make it before the ambulance departed, and she accompanied him to the hospital. After thorough psychological evaluation, it was determined that her son be placed on Ritalin, 5 milligrams to be administered in the morning at home, another 5 milligrams to be administered at noon by the school nurse. After 6 weeks, Jack's prognosis is excellent. He has not had any outbursts that could not be contained at the school level. Same story. Which one did you like best? The first one. You know why? Casual register is entertaining. It's akin to gossip. You know, and when I went, guess what happened? You went, what? And then that leads to another thing. And then what? And yeah, and oh, wow. But it's very difficult to write it. It's fun to speak in it, tough to write in it. And we all use both of them. The only problem occurs is when you can only use one. Can you see the need for it? Absolutely. Can you see why we must incorporate formal register in school if we want to get better academic performance from our kids? Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to see Rita, I think, on another day, and I'm sorry to say that she passed away sometime back, and because she's just very entertaining, and the Bridges Out of Poverty material that I mentioned, I mentioned this on Wednesday. The Bridges Out of Poverty first book was a framework for understanding poverty. And it was written by Ruby Payne, who is an educator. So listening to Rita, who is also an educator, sort of ties it all together, and we'll see more of Rita another day. And if you want to look at her videos, she's on YouTube, and it's Pierson, if you want to see some of the other things that she talks about. So what we learned about patterns of discourse from that video is that people in poverty, they're not giving you information per se. They're more telling you a story. And sometimes, and I know personally as a frontline worker, you just want to say, could you just answer the question? I just need to know if you're working. And what you get is a whole story about why the car wouldn't start, or the child being sick, or the dog threw up, or the kid lost their homework, or there was a traffic jam. You know, the answer might be in there somewhere, but it is a very circuitous route how you get there. And that's problematic for children in school because sometimes they're just supposed to give an answer. You know, they're not supposed to tell the whole story. The stories are very entertaining sometimes. They're very amusing. They tell you a whole lot about the child or the person that you're dealing with or doing business with. But is it an efficient way to get information? Probably not. Whereas telling a tale or telling a story in formal register, it has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. And it's very logical and proceeds from one timely event to another. And in business, that, of course, is the most efficient way to get things done. In conversation with your friends, you might start off to tell about what happened when you went looking for a dress to wear to your cousin's wedding and get sidetracked and go off on different tangents and sidebar stories to the point where you might forget what started the conversation, but eventually you wind your way back. So that would happen in casual register with friends. Not a good way to communicate if you're at work because people generally just want to get to the point. So a child who has grown up speaking casual register and relating incidents or providing information in this very circular pattern of discourse is not communicating in a way that's very efficient. And in this slide, you see if an individual depends on a random episodic story structure for memory pattern, and that's the key for the memory pattern. And you can see in the story of Jack, the child's memory pattern brought in 100 amusing and entertaining and funny sidebar stories. But if that child is dependent on that sort of episodic structure for memory patterns, lives in an unpredictable environment, and has not developed the ability to plan. So going back to the mental model of poverty, living in the present, living for today, just trying to get through today with all of the things you have to do today, does not help a person develop the ability to plan. You can't think about tomorrow because you cannot get through today. There's so much in your bandwidth getting through today, you're not thinking about tomorrow, so you're not planning. So you've got the circular story structure developing your memory patterns. Your environment is unpredictable because just of the chaos that poverty causes, and you've not developed the ability to plan in your thought process, then you don't learn how to plan, so you don't learn how to predict. If you don't learn how to predict, you don't learn how to identify cause and effect. If you can't identify cause and effect, you can't learn how to identify the consequence of behavior. If you can't identify consequence, you don't always control impulsivity. And now this last statement in no way means to imply that people in poverty have an inclination toward criminal behavior, because there's certainly all kinds of criminal behavior, poverty people, middle-class people, wealthy people. But if you have not learned how to control impulsivity, the inclination towards criminal behavior can be developed sooner. I mean, one of the first things that we teach our children is when you do something bad, something bad might happen to you. And that's when children learn consequence. If you misbehave, you're going to get punished. That's learning cause and effect. If I do this, then this will happen. So all of these things link together that come from casual register and speaking in casual discourse. You tie that back to the fact that people in poverty, because of their mental model, are less likely to develop the ability to plan. These things collide and leave the person unprepared to learn consequence, to control impulsivity, and that can lead them down the road into more and more kinds of problems. So these concepts together help you understand why a person in poverty, if they have a windfall, maybe the income tax refund or the stimulus money that people just got, all of a sudden there's a boatload of money on their debit card or in their bank account or cash in their hand. If you don't have the ability to plan, you might not make good decisions with this windfall. For some people, an unexpected bonus might mean, oh, I can pay off that credit card bill that's kind of crippling my ability to make ends meet every month. Or they might take the opportunity to get caught up on some utility bills, so they have an easier time making the money last until the end of the month. But to understand that kind of a decision, you have to understand cause and effect and consequence, and you have to have an ability to plan. From those of us in the middle class, if we want to buy a new dress or take a weekend trip or splurge on golf clubs or anything that's out of the ordinary, not part of our everyday or weekly purchases, we can do that if we stop to think, okay, if I go ahead and buy this, number one, will I be able to make the monthly payment? Or number two, is this going to impact my ability to buy food for the rest of the month? We can do that because we can plan and we understand cause and effect. If I blow my stimulus check on going to the beach for the weekend, assuming the beach is open, that I'm sure I'll have a good time, but would it have been better to get my utility bills under control and have more money month to month to month by paying off this one bill? So these things really, they all link together and work to keep a person in the barely getting by situation. So if you have, I think we'll take a 10-minute break now. So if you all have any comments or would like to elaborate on how the language development, the story structure, and the inability to plan impacts people, go ahead and put that in the comments section, and we'll look at it when we start up again at 10 o'clock. So Aaron, if you want to put up the break screen now, that would be great. And if you all could rejoin me at 10 o'clock, I'd appreciate it. All right. Welcome back. I just took the opportunity to go make my bed and talk to my son, so I hope you all made good use of your break as well. Thank you for coming back on time. So just to reiterate, when you link the mental model of a person in poverty who lives in the present, whose brain space is completely taken up with trying to get through to tomorrow with all of the things, all of the details, all of the troubles and inconveniences, you link that person with a random story structure, an unpredictable environment, and the fact that they haven't developed the ability to plan, you can see the long-term effect and how it can damage a person. So I think that really helps us understand sometimes the choices that the people we work with can make, which is not to say that people in the middle class and wealth don't make bad decisions, but people who live with such unpredictability and have not developed the ability to plan because of the necessity to live in today, it has a long-term effect. So I did not see any questions or comments, but feel free to ask them now, and we'll look again at the end of the session to see if there's anything else. Oh, shoot, I'm going to have to restart my PowerPoint. It is not advancing. I'm so sorry. Okay, there we go. Sorry. We talked a little bit about the nonverbal assist in conversation, specifically volume and tone and so on. And we each have several different voices that we use. A child uses the voice where they're sometimes defensive. It wasn't my fault. He made me do it. They're victimized. My brother did it. Children can be emotional, whining. We all know that. There's a losing attitude, a strongly negative nonverbal. But picking on me, as an example, you made me do it. I hate you. Those are traits of the child voice. People who are not children use the child voice, and those are the traits there: defensive, victimized, emotional. And we hear that a lot. We hear that from our friends. We might hear it from our coworkers. We hear it from our client. And so when you hear those things, those are clues that you're dealing with somebody who's sort of in a child place. The parent voice, which we are probably all familiar with as well, is authoritative, directive, judgmental, evaluative, win-lose mentality, demanding, punitive, and sometimes threatening. You shouldn't do that. Life's not fair. Get busy. That's the parent voice. We sometimes talk to our clients like that, or our customers, the people we do business with. If you've ever had a boss who spoke to you that way, it does not do much to bring, as far as bringing out the best in a person. When you are being spoken to by a person using the parent voice, what that says to me is that person is looking on me as a child, and that doesn't encourage me really to give them my best product, my best output. What we want is to speak in the adult voice. It's non-judgmental. It's free of negative nonverbals. It's factual. It's in a question format many times, and there's an attitude of win-win. As examples, in what ways are we able to resolve this? What are the choices in this situation? And when you're dealing with people in a business setting, using the adult voice is more likely to get you a win, to get you to a positive place, and is more likely to have the person responding to you to respond in the adult voice. If you speak in the parent voice, what you might get back is the child voice. And that's not conducive to moving forward and moving ahead. So those traits are also part of how language impacts a person, specifically a child who has grown up in generational poverty. So again, if you have comments or questions about this slide as well, please be sure to put them in the question and answer field. So we have talked a lot about, well, we've not talked about a lot, but I've mentioned resources several times, both Wednesday and so far this morning. So to better understand people from poverty, our definition of poverty will be the extent to which an individual does without resources. And this slide, and you may just want to print this slide and refer to it later. The definition of resources, the 8 resources that help keep a person come out of poverty and stay out of poverty are, number 1, financial. And again, this is money, but this is not the only thing. Financial means being able to purchase the goods and services of your class and sustain that, meaning I can buy a car and I know that my monthly income is enough so that not only can I buy it, I can continue to pay for it until the car is paid off. That's what sustaining the purchase would mean. Emotional resources is your ability to choose and control your emotional responses, particularly to negative situations without self-destructive behavior. It shows itself through choices. Someone who responds very negatively in an emotional way to a setback at work or to being given an assignment that they don't particularly like, and they choose to respond emotionally, is not going to have a happy outcome in the work setting. You can certainly have a temper tantrum at work, but you might only be able to have it that one time and then you're gone. So being able to control how you respond in an emotional way is a resource. That's a resource people have. Mental resources are obviously having the mental abilities and the acquired skills that go with it to deal with daily life. You need to be able to read. You need to be able to put a sentence together. You need to be able to add and subtract. And you need to have the mental capacity to accomplish these tasks. I think this is very interesting. A resource is having a spiritual belief is a resource to help people rise out of and stay out of poverty. And that's believing in a divine purpose and guidance. It doesn't mean that everybody on the planet has to be this particular religion. It has to be Christian or Muslim or Buddhist or whatever. But the person needs to believe in a divine purpose and guidance, which is another way of saying believing in a bigger thing than just themselves. That's a spiritual resource. Having that ability or having that gift is a resource. Physical ability. It's easier to work when you have your health and when you're mobile. That helps people rise up and stay out of poverty. Support systems, having friends and family and backup resources available to access in times of need. Those are external resources. The first ones we talked about, financial, emotional, mental, and spiritual, and physical, those are internal, specific to that person. The support system, and then below that, the relationship and role models, those are external. Those are things outside of the person. Your support system would possibly include your next door neighbor who could maybe babysit your child because you can't send her to daycare because she's got a cold or something, or having somebody that could give you a ride to work if you're having car trouble or you have to take your car in for a state inspection. Those having resources in the form of a support system help people rise up and stay out of poverty. Having relationships and role models, having access to adults who are appropriate, who are nurturing, and who don't engage in destructive behavior. When I taught this class at the University of Richmond, there was a gentleman in the class who came from one of the Richmond families who donates theaters and gymnasiums and libraries. And so I knew who he was, and I knew he came from wealth. And he said one day in our class, he said, well, I don't really see what the big deal is. If you need money, you get a job. It's just not that complicated. And I kind of wanted to thank him for making the point for me. And I said, sure, I get that. But what if you lived somewhere where you never saw that happen? If you grew up in a house where nobody got up, got dressed, went to work every day, how are you supposed to know what that looks like? As a personal example, I grew up in a house where my dad worked at Richmond Airport, and he left the house every morning at 8 o'clock. He always had on a suit and tie. He had a briefcase, and he went off every day at 8 o'clock. Because of the nature of his job, he would get phone calls at home from time to time. And so I heard how my dad spoke to people. I heard that no matter who it was on the other end of the line, whether it was somebody from an airline or somebody from the city or somebody that worked for him, Dad was always very polite. He was always respectful. He was endlessly patient. And so that was an example to me of this is how you act when you're at work. You are polite. You treat people with respect. You grant them patience. When my dad retired, he had enough sick leave to cash in, and he bought himself a little pickup truck. And what that said to me was that work is important and you go every day. So I had no excuse to not be a good employee. I knew exactly what it looked like. But if you haven't seen what it looks like, how are you supposed to know? And if you grew up in an area or a neighborhood that was a little rough, and people in your neighborhood, there's a lot of fighting, there's a lot of squabbling, you learn that skill or that mechanism, which that might work on the street, being combative or fighting or squabbling, but that's not appropriate behavior for the workplace. But that's what you're taking off to the workplace in the absence of any other kind of coping mechanism, if you've not seen the coping mechanism. And then the eighth resource is you have to understand the knowledge of the hidden rules. And one of the hidden rules might be what I was just talking about, that conflict resolution in the workplace isn't really slugging your coworker whether you want to or not. You know, that's not conflict resolution, and that is a hidden rule. Nobody has posted it on a wall in your office building, or I would be surprised if they had, but nobody says to you, yeah, so we don't solve our differences by hitting people. You know, that's one of those rules it's not explained to you because people just assume if you're a grown-up and you're in the work environment, you know that you don't resolve your differences by hitting people. And again, you might be able to do it once, but after that, you've lost the job, so you can't do it again. So hidden rules are critical. You might not know going into a situation. You might not know what they are because you're new to the situation, but you have to understand and remember that whether you know them or not, the hidden rules are there. And a smart person going into a situation where they're not familiar might take a little bit of time to step back and observe how people interact, how things are done, and so on. So in the course of training this material in front of various types of groups, I've heard a lot of comments, which is one thing I am missing from you all today, is that I'm not hearing what you think. But I had an example, and actually, again, this is from my personal life. I used to live across the street from a lady who she had a physical defect, and I don't really know if it was caused by scoliosis or osteogenesis or what, but her spine was very, very crooked, and she walked with both a crutch, the kind that has a support around your lower arm. She had a crutch like that, and she had a walking stick. And so she really, it really limited her mobility. She couldn't drive a car and so on. But she had a job, so she had financial resources. She had emotional resources. She was able to get up and go to work every day. She had the mental resource. She had a good job with the Department of Disability Determination. She had a spiritual resource. She was a churchgoer. She did not have good physical health and mobility. She did have a support system. The City of Richmond Caravan picked her up every day. She must have had relationships and role models, because even without the physical resource, she was able to find a career and build a career for herself. And because she had been at the same employer for 15 or 16 years by the time I met her, I'm assuming that she had a good knowledge of the hidden rules. So she did not have all of the resources, but she had enough of the resources so she could compensate for not having good physical health. And again, over the course of training this material for the last 3 years or so, I have heard various comments from people, and one of the comments that I hear a lot is, well, I guess I grew up poor because I guess I grew up in poverty because we didn't have any money. But the person who was talking to me would have an emotional resource, able to regulate their responses and emotional responses and behavior. Had good mental resources because they were in a productive line of work. Church-going people, although to have a spiritual resource, you don't have to belong to an organized religion. They had good physical health, support systems, relationships, and role models. So money is only one of 8 resources. And I may have mentioned this Wednesday, so if you're hearing it for the second time, forgive me, but if money was the only thing that kept people out of poverty, then why do you read stories about lottery winners who win, $17 million, and 3 years later they're filing for bankruptcy? It's because they did not have the other resources to keep them out of poverty once they had money. The other part of it is that people who come into money and they have been poor, they have lived in generational poverty, they have learned, or they have sort of debts to people that have helped them along the way. And because relationships are the underlying premise in poverty, it is important to keep your relationships. So if you have a friend who knows you have money and that friend asks you for cash to make a down payment on a car, or money to pay the security deposit so they can move, or any number of reasons that you would need cash, then your cash is going to go away relatively quickly if you are having to support people that are in your relationship circle. And that happens very often with people who have been in poverty. They have, along the way, they have incurred a sort of a debt because someone reached out and gave them a helping hand. And so when the table is turned and they're the person who has the cash now, then the expectation is that they will extend that helping hand. So it's important to remember that how a person escapes poverty and stays out of poverty is dependent on various resources besides just money. Money solves a lot of problems. It's a whole lot easier to have money than not have money, but it's not the only resource that's needed to get out of poverty. So when we talk about poverty and we talk about resources, these 8 things that we just talked about are the things that you need to remember. As I mentioned in some of those resources, connections and social networks and reciprocity and trustworthiness are kinds of resources. And we have in our personal resources, we have bonding resources, which would be our support system, the people who help us get from day to day, give us a ride, babysit the kids, lend us some cash, take us to the grocery store. Those are bonding resources. Your bridging resources would be your role models and your mentors, people who give you a reference when you apply for a job, or people who tell you about a job, or tell you about a job that you would be good at. And they might make a connection for you or introduce you to somebody. That's a bridging resource. That's a resource that helps you get onward and upward. And then we have our thick and thin resources, people that are there for us when times are tight, and then also there for us when times are good. And this little diagram just kind of gives you an idea of, you'll see the inner circle. Those are the bonding resources, the things that help you stay afloat where you are. The outer circle, those are the bridging resources that help you get onward and upward. And a lot of the resources that people have are just by nature the bonding personal resources. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the hidden rules, and I'm just I think I've jumped ahead of myself a little bit. Now we're not going to talk about hidden rules today. We're talking. I'm just going to review the resources. So think about a person you know that you have dealt with, and you know that person was in poverty. Do you know enough about them to understand whether they had money or not? If they had money, they probably wouldn't be sitting across the desk from you, right? But what about their family situation? Are they on their own? Is there a family? Is there a grandmother or an aunt that helps them, that is a bonding resource that helps them get from day to day? When you're trying to help a person move onward and upward, knowing what they're starting with, knowing what their baseline is, can help you build a plan for that person to get ahead. Suggesting that somebody take a class or go to school, but they don't have childcare and they don't have transportation, you sort of set them into a situation where they can't get ahead because they can't meet that. They can't accept that resource because they don't have the resources needed to get there. So understanding, when you're helping a person who is in poverty, understanding what resources they have helps you to plan for a better outcome for them. And there's one exercise that you can do in your own life, and look at that list of the 8 resources and figure out, what's my financial resource? Do I have money in my savings account so that if some catastrophe comes my way, I'd be able to dig myself out of it? If I run into a problem, do I have somebody to call? Do I have a source of good advice? Do I have somebody who could rescue me if my car died in the middle of nowhere? Those are the kinds of things that help you get from day to day. Are you healthy? Clearly, being in the job that you're in, you've got some mental resources, and you probably have some emotional resources, because for most of you all on the training session today, you're in a stressful line of work. It's not easy, and you all have stressful days where you want to have a temper tantrum or throw your coffee cup across the room, but you probably have the emotional resource to maybe not do that. When I trained this material for the State Department of Social Services, one of the young ladies in the room raised her hand when we were talking about resources, and she said, well, I grew up in poverty, and I had a baby when I was still a teenager, and my family was very disappointed with me, and they weren't willing to help me. But and she went on to list the things that she did. She got an apartment, she rented a room out, she got some education. I mean, she listed out all of the things that she did, and she said, so I disagree with you about what the resources are. And what I realized was that in her conversation, she meant she did not have, obviously she did not have the financial resource, but she felt that she didn't have a support system. She didn't really have anybody to help her out when she ran into a bind. She didn't have anybody to babysit her kids or give her a ride to work if she needed. And she felt that she had never really had a role model, that she didn't have a mentor. She didn't have somebody to set a good example, because when she ran into a tough spot, her family turned their backs on her. So, she felt that she didn't have those resources. But we were able to turn the table on her, because when she looked at the resources, she did not give herself credit for having an emotional resource, for understanding that when you are faced with a disappointment, your response to it is important and can move you forward or push you backward. She didn't give herself credit for having mental ability. She didn't give herself credit for how intelligent she was, and how much initiative and ambition that she had. She didn't give herself credit because she had a spiritual resource. She was very involved in her church, and in giving back to other people, that strengthened her as well, but she had not given herself credit for that. She was a healthy person. She was in good health and her mobility was good. She did not give herself credit for that. What she did not have was the support system and the relationship role model. She did not have external resources, but her internal resources were there and were strong. And she had just not given herself credit for that. So when we processed that out with her, she was able to see what the difference was for her, and she was very, very fortunate to be bright and to have initiative and to have intelligence, so that she could figure out the things that she needed to do. And then also, because she had the spiritual resource, she was able, even while she was struggling herself, even while she was still struggling herself, she was able to do some volunteer work with her church, which gave her a sense of fulfillment, gave her a sense of being, a worthwhile and productive and useful person. So when we think about the resources that a person has, we have to make sure that the person understands their own value, their own value as far as being physically healthy, as having an emotional resource, as having the mental resources to do what they need to do. Having emotional intelligence, which I think the concept of emotional intelligence was first really developed and understood somewhere in the mid 80s, so long after I had my degree in psychology, that's for sure. But it has become to be a more important indicator of success in the workplace than your intellectual intelligence. So EQ, emotional intelligence, is more important than IQ. Being able to regulate and respond appropriately in the workplace is just as important as how smart you are and how much you can get done. So when we work with the folks that come to our organization, we build the interventions on strengths and resiliency. I think the first principle of social work is to build on strength. Sometimes it might be pretty hard to figure out where the strength is, but building a resource based on what they've already got, or building a pattern or an intervention based on what you know is already there, is going to lead to a more successful outcome than not. And help people understand, like we did with the young lady in the training class, help her understand that she was blessed. She did have resources. She did have capabilities and capacities, and she had just flat not given herself enough credit for those. The third understanding of resources is that you engage people in poverty in solving both their problems and their community problems. I think I mentioned on Wednesday the welfare reform initiatives in the mid-90s, and they were built basically on the premise that people were poor because they made bad decisions. And I think that happened that way because in building solutions, both at the local and the state and the federal levels, if you don't involve the person or the people that you're trying to help, you're not going to have a happy outcome, because you're not going to get the full understanding of the constraints and the barriers that they're dealing with in their own life. So part of the Bridges Out of Poverty concepts are to bring the people in poverty to the table when you're building strategies and solutions. You have to provide people with economic opportunities for individuals from poverty, and part of welfare reform was insisting that people get work experience, whether it was paid or volunteer. It's really hard to get a job when there's absolutely nothing on the resume. So even if it's a volunteer opportunity, that puts the first couple of lines on the resume. The fifth principle is in developing resources is to help your community develop those resources through economic development and opportunities for people, not just to get out of poverty, but to get out of poverty and then get ahead in the world. And that's where we talk more about careers than jobs, to help people move not just onward, but onward and upward. And then to make the appropriate referrals based on the person's interests and skills and talents and gifts. And I think just helping, when you help a person, you have got to understand what point are they starting from? What is it that's already in their background that's going to be the most helpful? If there's no role model in their life, how do they know what work looks like? How do they know what work sounds like? You can't bring the rules of the street into the work setting. So understanding what their support systems and role models have been going to help you move that person forward in a positive way, because you'll know what barriers you have to overcome. Getting people out of poverty is really not one size fits all. It can be very individual, and so a good assessment of where the person is starting is critical. And a good practice exercise for that is to look at your own life and figure out, on a scale of 1 to 10, where am I on my finances? Am I physically healthy? Do I respond appropriately? I worked with a woman one time, and she was very frustrating because she did not understand how she came across to people. And I think there are a lot of people in the workaday setting who just don't understand how they come across to people. And I was complaining to my son, who would acknowledge to you that, in fact, he is a genius. And he said, "Mom, it's called self-monitoring. Look it up." And so I did look it up. And there are people who who never ever look back and see, when there's a problem, what was their role in the problem? One of the smartest people I ever worked with was a foster care worker that I managed when I was a local director. And with every visit she made to her kids, she would come back to the office, and I'm sure she started the process while she was driving back to the office, but she would think about the interaction that she had with the child, and did the visit go the way she wanted the visit to go? And if the visit went off the rails, at what point did that happen? What had precipitated that? And she always reviewed her own interactions with the child, because that's the part that she can control, is how she dealt with the child. And so it was one of the best examples I had ever seen of self-monitoring and emotional intelligence. A lot of times we see victim behavior because, when you're the victim, you don't have to fix anything. None of it is your fault, so you don't have to fix it. It's not up to you to fix it. And people are comfortable with that. People are comfortable with not being responsible for fixing stuff. Helping people understand the control that they do have, particularly when they are in the workplace, will help them be in a more successful place. I cannot change your behavior. I can't. I cannot motivate you. I cannot change your behavior. What I can do is give you a good example. If I'm managing, if I'm your supervisor and I'm responsible for managing you, I can give you a good example of the behavior I expect in the workplace, the results I expect in the workplace. I can give you that. I can give you an example. I can give you consequences for when behavior is not good. I can do that. I can give you rewards for good behavior. Clearly not, cash rewards, because I've always worked in local government, but I can give you recognition at a staff meeting. I can put a letter in your file thanking you for something in particular. So the point is, I can't change your behavior. I can only give you examples and consequences and rewards. And I think it's important for people to understand that in the work setting. So to wrap this up, we need to really understand what resources the person brings to the table that are helpful to them when we begin to work with them and when we're trying to understand them. And then when we're planning for them or helping them plan, we need to understand what the strengths in their resources are, base our plans on that, and in the meantime, work on building and strengthening the things that we have identified that were a lack for them. And so here's a little exercise that you can do, is just looking at those 8 resources, grade them for yourself. You know, if you have all 5s and all of them, good for you. And again, you don't have to share the results with anybody. But look at what your personal resources are, and then maybe think about a person that you have worked with and their resources were a little sketchy. And are you able to identify where they're standing in strength as far as their resources are and where they are lacking, so that you can begin to build on what's strong and begin to develop what's weak. So that is where we're going to stop today, and just quickly to begin to bring things together again. Think about our mental models and how our person in poverty is living in the tyranny of the moment, just trying to get from today until tomorrow, and how that impacts your ability to future plan, because you never think about the future. You just don't have time to think about the future. You are so caught up in getting until tomorrow that the future doesn't really have a whole lot of reality. So you couple that with the language development. We send kids to school and they speak casual register, and they get into the land of school, and then later they get into the land of work, and they don't have the language that is spoken where they end up. Add that to learning how to speak and relate information in sort of a random and circular and chaotic story structure, which contributes to the inability to see beginning, middle, end, and cause and effect and consequences. You begin to see how all of these things come together to create barriers for people in poverty. And so from there, we switch over to what the resources people have are, so that you understand that poverty is not just about money. Poverty is about all of the 8 things that the person brings to the table, and that have to be evaluated and acknowledged before we begin to bring the person onward and upward. So with that, Vicki, I guess I will toss this back to you if you have any additional comments, or where we're going to go starting on next Monday.
Kathy, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
There is one question. Someone asked, which of the 8 resources do you feel are more crucial to move out of poverty?
Oh, that's like asking me which one of my kids I like best. And, you know, it depends on the day that you ask me, to tell you the truth. I think that if I had to pick just one, I'd probably lean towards emotional intelligence, and having an emotional resource, just because of the fact that seems to be a stronger predictor of success in the workplace. But, you know, if you couple that with a person who has had good role models, you know, you begin to really build the kinds of skill sets and behaviors that you need to be successful in the workplace. It really is hard to say just, you know, what the one thing is, but like the lady I told you about, she had a lot of resources. She just had not given herself credit for the work that she had done. I think she gave herself credit for the work that she had done, but she did not realize how fortunate she was to be physically healthy and mobile and smart and to have interpersonal skills and so on. So, again, and if you ask me the question on Monday, I might just give you another answer. It just depends because they're all important.
Okay.
Any other comment or question?
That was the only question that we had. If anybody else has a question, feel free to type it in right now.
Kathy, this is Patty. I'm just jumping in because I had 3 questions for you, and I can only do it as moderator, Pat. Well, the first question I had was, are the 8 resources that you listed, are you saying that that's social capital? That's what social capital is?
Social capital and human capital, localities can have social and human capital. Social capital is the opportunities for people to have jobs that pay a living wage. Social capital is having the things that people need to get ahead in your community. Human capital are having the people that can do the jobs that you need to have done. Do you see that? Do you see the difference?
Yeah.
Social capital, if you have absolutely no jobs in your community, it's hard to get people moving ahead. So that's social capital. And also not just the jobs, but trade schools maybe, transportation, daycare centers, the kinds of things that have to come together so that people can be employed and move onward and upward. Those contribute your social capital.
Okay. And then the other question that I had was that while you advise those in the agency setting to engage people who live in poverty in solving individual and community problems, we will be, after this summit, we'll be engaging a work group who may not all be social worker folks in coming up with a strategy for our community to help people out of poverty who want to be helped out of poverty. So can you engage people in these actions that you suggested who are not seeking to move?
Are you talking about engaging people in poverty or engaging other people in your community? I'm not getting.
Engaging people in poverty.
Yeah, and I think I talked a little bit on Wednesday about the book Getting Ahead in a Just Getting By World. It's another book in the AHA Process series, and it takes. You start with a class of people who are currently living in poverty, and you start them by having them define, by drawing a picture really, of what their ideal world would be. If they were living the way they wanted to live, what would that look like? And one of the things that's important for that program to work is people who show up for the class get paid for their time. Now, it's not, we did it in Powhatan County, and we didn't give them a whole bundle of money. We gave them, I think, $25 gift cards. But you had to come to the class to get the gift card. And it was a way to help people understand that their time can be valuable. Their time can be worth money. And it helps people understand future planning, and particularly people who have never been in a situation where they have been able to future plan. It takes them through the process, although going backwards from where they want to be, going backwards to where they are now, and then helping them see, what future planning looks like. That's a way to get people into the mindset of moving upward. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think that when you begin to build programs, And I think, like I mentioned, I think that this was one of the weaknesses of the welfare reform initiatives, was that the people for whom the programs were being built did not have the opportunity for input. And so the obstacles and the barriers that might have been identified earlier were not identified because the people building the program didn't have those problems. So I just think it's really important to include people who have lived this life when you're planning. I mean, sometimes you build something with every good intention, but because of something that you personally have never dealt with and haven't experienced, you've built something that's not achievable for people. So, it's helpful it's critical really to bring people to the table when you're building something for them.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks for the question. If you've not seen that book, again, it's AHA Process, AHAPROCESS.com, and you'll see the range of material that they have. And getting ahead, how I mean, obviously your first class has got to be people that have not been through the class before because you've not run the class. But after you've run one class, then if you can get at least one person from that class to participate as an instructor for the next class, then you're building a cadre of people who have actually accomplished something with it. And that helps people who are not familiar with it. That helps them understand that this is something that can work for them. And sometimes when there are not a lot of opportunities, if you don't have a major employer, if you don't have opportunities to work, sometimes it helps people understand where their own strengths are, and they can start their own business, whether it's something that doesn't involve, a master's degree like a lawn care service. Although, no disrespect, I understand that can be very complex as far as buying equipment, scheduling time, and that kind of thing. But you can be successful in that business without a PhD. Or a house cleaning service. Again, that can be complex as far as understanding what the work is and the scheduling and so on. But the work itself it doesn't require but so much education. And you can start that kind of business on your own if there's no opportunity for, if there's not a lot of jobs floating around in your community, like particularly now in the middle of a pandemic when so many places are closed. It helps people understand what their strengths are and what their values are and what they are good at that they could maybe build into an employment opportunity for themselves. Vicki, anything from you?
Nope. Just a reminder to everybody that we are continuing this on Monday at 9 o'clock. So I hope everybody will have a wonderful weekend and come back on Monday. We have not set a day for the work group after this, but please start thinking about it and whether or not you'd be interested in committing any time to that committee. And on Monday, I'll give you a date for our first meeting. And on that note, have a wonderful rest of the weekend. Thank you again, Catherine. It's been very valuable information, and we will see everybody on Monday.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.